Beggar widow shared last bread with stranger. He was the most powerful alpha king. The rain fell in relentless sheets over the outskirts of Urindor, turning the dirt paths into a river of mud. The wind howled through the skeletal remains of abandoned houses, carrying whispers of forgotten lives. Among them, a lone figure moved carefully, balancing a fragile basket of roots and stale bread. This was Celara, a widow whose husband had died the winter before, leaving her to face the world alone. Her eyes, dark and tired, still held a spark, a stubborn flame of life that refused to be snuffed out by hunger or despair. Her home was no more than a crumbling hut, its roof leaking in places, its walls a patchwork of old wood and scavenged cloth. Inside, she had a small table, 2 chairs, one broken, and the ashes of a fire that had long since gone cold. Every day, Celara fought against the emptiness of her life. Every day, she scavenged scraps to survive, never imagining that one stormy evening would change her fate forever. As she turned a corner, she saw him. A man slumped in the mud, rain soaking through his cloak. His face was hidden beneath a hood, but even in the dim light, there was something extraordinary about him. His presence drew a strange hush to the storm, as if the world itself paused to take note. Celara hesitated for only a heartbeat. Hunger gnawed at her belly and her heart ached for the sight of another human suffering, but fear told her to run. "Please," the man murmured, his voice hoarse, almost a whisper against the wind. "Help me," Celara's instinct overpowered caution. She approached slowly, kneeling beside him. His hands were pale, trembling, and his cloak, though fine, was torn and caked in mud. Without thinking, she tore the last piece of bread from her basket, breaking it in half. She pressed it into his hands. "Eat," she said softly. "It's all I have." He looked up and Celara froze. His eyes were like liquid silver, reflecting the storm around them. They were eyes that spoke of power and darkness, of danger and mystery, yet they softened for just a moment when he saw her offering. He took the bread with a trembling hand and ate. "Why?" he asked, barely above a whisper, as if unsure he deserved such kindness. Celara shrugged, hiding the flutter of curiosity in her chest. "Because no one deserves to starve," she said simply. He stared at her, studying her face as though searching for some hidden truth. Then, almost imperceptibly, he smiled, a faint, strange curve of lips that made her stomach tighten with something she could not name. "You are different," he said. And before she could respond, the wind and rain swallowed him. He rose with unnatural grace, and in an instant he was gone, leaving only the echo of silver eyes in her memory. Celara sat in the mud, heart racing, wondering if the man had been real. The storm continued around her, indifferent to the strange connection that had passed between them. She looked at her empty basket, the last piece of bread gone, and sighed. Hunger was one thing, but curiosity was a dangerous companion. The next morning, as dawn painted the sky with pale gold, Celara awoke to a soft knocking at her door. She froze. Visitors rarely came to the outskirts, and those who did often brought trouble. Yet, trembling, she opened the door, and there it was. A piece of parchment, heavy and edged in gold, lay at her feet. She picked it up, brushing off mud. Her eyes widened as she read the words, written in a flowing hand she could scarcely imagine someone would write for her. "Celara of Urindor, you are summoned to the palace at once. Do not refuse." Alpha King Kalen, her heart hammered. The Alpha King, the ruler feared by all, whispered about in tales of shadow and power, had sent for her. Why, she was nothing but a beggar widow. But the summons was clear. The paper shimmered faintly in her hands, a strange warmth pulsing from it. It felt alive. She couldn't explain it, but some part of her, deep in her chest, told her that refusing was not an option. As she prepared to leave, she looked back at her humble hut, at the life she had clawed together from scraps and sorrow. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of hope mingled with fear. Perhaps the man in the storm was real. Perhaps her small act of kindness had drawn the attention of someone who could change her life forever, or end it. The journey to the palace was long and treacherous. The storm had left the roads slick and treacherous, rivers swollen, and the forests dark with mist. Yet Celara moved forward, driven by a mix of curiosity, courage, and an unshakable need to understand why the most powerful man in the kingdom had sought her out. As she entered the capital, the city revealed itself in muted grandeur. Towers of obsidian rose into the gray sky, spires twisting like black flames. Statues of long-dead kings and warriors stood sentinel over the streets, their faces cold and unyielding. And at the center, larger and taller than any other structure, loomed the palace, a fortress of shadows and light, carved from stone and magic alike. Celera approached the gates, where guards clad in silver and black halted her. "You are summoned by the Alpha King," she said, holding up the golden-edged parchment. The guards exchanged a glance. One nodded. "Follow," he commanded, his voice like steel. Inside, the palace was a world apart from the streets outside. Rich tapestries hung on stone walls and candlelight flickered across marble floors. The air was scented with incense and something more, something ancient, like power itself had taken a form and filled the halls. Celera's heart pounded as they led her to a grand hall. There at the far end a figure stood in shadow, her breath caught. The cloak, the poise, the silver eyes, he was the man from the storm. Alpha King Kalen. He stepped forward, the soft click of his boots echoing across the vast room. "You are brave," he said, his voice low, rich and commanding. "Most would have fled or hidden, yet here you are. Why?" Celera met his gaze, her own resolve hardening. "Because no one should suffer alone," she replied. Kalen's eyes softened for a fleeting moment. Then he gave a faint, almost imperceptible nod. "We shall see if your courage lasts beyond words." Before she could ask what he meant, a sudden chill swept the hall. Shadows twisted unnaturally along the walls, moving as if alive. Celera shivered. The Alpha King's gaze hardened, and for the first time she sensed the weight of the curse that bound him. The air seemed to hum with a quiet warning. She had entered a world where power and danger walked side by side, and one wrong step could be her last. Yet despite the fear, Celera felt something else, an inexplicable pull toward him. She did not understand it, but she knew her life had changed forever. As Kalen turned, a servant stepped forward, bowing low. "Your Majesty, the council awaits." Celera's heart skipped. Council. Here, what role could she possibly play in the affairs of kings? Kalen's eyes flicked toward her, and she noticed something in his expression, a mixture of intrigue, calculation, and something she could not name. "Come," he said, motioning for her to follow. "Your trial begins." And with that, Celera stepped into the palace proper, her world expanding into corridors of shadow and light, into a story she had never imagined she would be part of. The storm outside had ended, but the storm within the palace and within her heart had only just begun. As they walked, Celera stole one last glance at the hallway behind her. For a moment, she thought she saw silver eyes glowing in the shadows, watching, waiting, and perhaps testing her. And somewhere deep in the palace, a shadow stirred, whispering a single truth. Kindness can awaken even the darkest of hearts. Celera's first steps into the palace proper were cautious, her heart beating so fast she thought it might echo through the marble halls. The corridors were vast, stretching farther than her eyes could see, lined with obsidian walls that absorbed the morning light. Each step she took felt heavier than the last, as if the shadows themselves were aware of her presence. King Kalen walked beside her, tall and commanding, his cloak brushing the floor, silent as midnight. He spoke little, only guiding her through the palace's labyrinthine corridors. The servants and guards bowed deeply as she passed, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Whispers floated behind her, carrying fragments of tales she had only heard in the streets, of the Alpha King's unmatched power, of curses whispered to haunt the throne, and of warriors who had vanished within these same halls. Celera swallowed her fear, holding her head high. She had survived hunger, cold, and despair. She could survive this. The first room she entered was unlike any she had imagined. Its ceiling was impossibly high, draped in tapestries that shimmered with threads of silver and gold. Candles floated in midair, casting a soft, warm glow that danced across carved pillars of black stone. The scent of jasmine and smoke mingled, intoxicating and heavy. At the far end, Kalen stopped, turning to face her. "This will be your chamber," he said, voice low, carrying both authority and an unspoken weight. "You are a guest of the crown, yet understand this. Nothing in this palace is as it seems. Trust carefully." Celera studied him, noting the subtle tension in his posture, the way his eyes darted briefly toward the ceiling, then back to her. There was a watchfulness in him, a constant vigilance. She wondered if it was a king's instinct, or the curse itself that kept him alert. Before she could ask, Kalen motioned toward a pair of guards. "Leave her be," he commanded, "but do not underestimate her." The guards bowed and vanished into the shadows. Celera took a moment to breathe. Her chamber was modest compared to the grandeur outside. A small bed, a wooden desk, and a window that overlooked the palace gardens. Yet the room held warmth, and for the first time since leaving her home, she felt a strange sense of safety. Later, Kaelin summoned her to the central hall, where a gathering of council members awaited. They were stern men and women, each draped in robes of deep blue and silver, their faces carved with years of service to the throne. They spoke of politics, alliances, and threats to the kingdom, and Solara listened in silence, absorbing every word. Kaelin observed her closely. "Do not fear them," he said softly, bending slightly so only she could hear. "Fear can blind you faster than any sword. Speak your mind carefully, but do not vanish into silence. That is a greater danger than anything else here." Solara nodded, her pulse quickened by the nearness of him. Even in this room full of power, Kaelin's presence dominated everything: the space, the conversation, the air itself. Yet behind the commanding exterior, she sensed something fragile, almost hidden, waiting for trust. Days passed. Solara learned to navigate the palace's corridors, guided by Kaelin's watchful gaze. She discovered the kitchens, where laughter and warmth flourished despite the cold walls; the library, where ancient tomes whispered secrets of magic, kings, and old curses; and the gardens, where silver fountains mirrored the moonlight. It was in the gardens that Solara first glimpsed the shadow of Kaelin's curse. A wolf appeared from the mist, its eyes glinting like silver under the moon. Solara froze, but Kaelin's hand was already at her back, steadying her. "Do not fear it," he said, voice low and firm. "It is part of me, and yet not entirely." The wolf circled them, its gaze intense and knowing. Solara felt the hairs on her arms rise. It looks alive," she whispered. Kaelin's eyes were dark, thoughtful, and troubled. "It is a piece of the curse I bear," he explained. "It tests those who come close. Only those who are brave or pure of heart may pass its judgment." Solara took a deep breath, her chest tightening with a mix of fear and resolve. "Then let it judge me," she said. "I am not afraid of shadows." Kaelin studied her for a long moment. Then quietly the wolf stepped back, fading into the mist as if acknowledging her courage. Solara exhaled, her heart still racing. The nights in the palace were both beautiful and strange. Candles floated in midair, shadows twisted and lengthened, and sometimes she thought she could hear whispers, soft, almost like the echo of a long-forgotten voice. Kaelin would occasionally appear at her window, standing silently, watching her sleep, or sometimes just to speak a few words in the quiet hours. "You are stronger than you know," he said one evening, his silver eyes reflecting the moonlight. "And yet your courage frightens you at times, does it not?" Solara shook her head. "I am not afraid of you," she said softly. But even as she spoke, she felt the truth of her own heartbeat, the fear and the fascination that pulsed together in a confusing rhythm. Kaelin's lips curved faintly. "Good," he murmured. "Fear can bind a person, and I do not wish to bind you, not yet." But not all was quiet within the palace. Whispers of rebellion stirred among the council, and some eyed Solara with suspicion. They questioned her presence, her sudden importance, and even her courage. Kaelin did not always defend her, but he watched her with an intensity that made it clear. She was no ordinary guest. She was part of something far greater, whether she understood it or not. One evening, as the first snow of winter began to fall, Solara wandered through the palace corridors alone, following the faint hum of magic that seemed to pulse from the walls themselves. She found herself before a hall she had not seen before, its doors carved with silver runes that glimmered faintly. Drawn by curiosity, she pushed the doors open. Inside, the room was empty, except for a single figure kneeling at the center, a low chant vibrating through the air. The shadows seemed to gather around him, moving like water, and the figure's silver eyes gleamed with an intensity that made Solara step back. "Kaelin." He rose as she entered, and for a moment the world outside seemed to vanish. "You should not be here," he said, though his voice carried no anger, only recognition. "I could say the same to you," Solara replied, trying to steady her voice. "I did not mean to intrude." Kaelin studied her silently, and then softly he said, "You are drawn to what others fear. That is rare." Solara felt a shiver run down her spine. "Why do you fear it?" she asked, nodding toward the shadows that swirled around him. "They are part of me," he admitted. "A curse I carry, one that has made me the man the kingdom fears. They test loyalty, courage, heart. Few survive their presence without losing themselves." Solara met his gaze, steady and unwavering. "Then perhaps you need someone who does not fear shadows," she said. Kaelin's eyes widened slightly. No one had ever spoken to him that way, not even those closest to the throne. There was an edge of disbelief, a hint of something fragile like hope struggling to rise within him. For a moment, silence fell between them. The shadows pulsed softly, as though listening, waiting. Then Kalen spoke, voice low and deliberate. "You may not understand what you are stepping into, Selara. This palace, this kingdom, the very man you see before you, all of it is bound in shadow. One wrong move, one careless word, and you could be trapped in its web forever." Selara swallowed, but she did not retreat. "Then I will step carefully," she said, "and I will not run from what I cannot see." Kalen's lips curved faintly, almost a smile, though his silver eyes held a flicker of worry. "Brave words," he said. "Let us see if you can live by them." As she turned to leave the room, she felt a movement in the shadows behind her. A faint growl, almost imperceptible, like the echo of the wolf in the gardens. Selara's heart raced, yet she did not falter. She had faced hunger, cold, and despair. This she could face as well. The moonlit hall was colder than any night Selara had ever known. Candles floated like tiny stars across the ceiling, casting shifting shadows that danced along the walls. She tightened the cloak around her shoulders, her fingers trembling, not from cold, but from the anticipation that churned in her chest. She had received Kalen's golden-edged message just before sunset, and now, as the hour approached, her courage was tested more by the unknown than by fear itself. When she arrived, the hall was empty, except for him. Kalen stood at the far end, a tall silhouette against the pale light. His silver eyes glimmered in the candlelight, as if reflecting the moon itself. Around him, the shadows seemed to twist and coil, alive in a way that made the air heavy and difficult to breathe. "You have come," he said, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of warning. "Many would hesitate, few would step willingly into what they cannot see." "I am not like most," Selara said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "I have already faced things no one else would understand. Shadows do not scare me." Kalen tilted his head, studying her. A faint smile touched his lips. "Brave words, but bravery alone does not protect you." With a flick of his hand, the candles dimmed and the shadows surged forward, filling the hall like a living tide. Selara froze, feeling the cold breath of the dark swirl around her. Then a soft growl echoed from the darkness, and she realized the wolf she had seen in the gardens was here, yet larger, more powerful, and its eyes burning with silver light. "Step forward," Kalen commanded. "Show me that your courage is more than words." Selara's heart pounded, but she did not step back. Slowly, carefully, she moved forward, feeling the shadows brush past her like whispering fingers. The wolf circled her, sniffing, its gaze sharp and testing. Each step she took, she reminded herself of who she was, a woman who had survived hunger, despair, and the loss of her home. When she reached the center of the hall, she stopped and lifted her chin, meeting Kalen's gaze. "I am not afraid," she said. The wolf snarled, low and menacing, yet did not attack. Instead, it circled once more and then vanished into the shadows as if acknowledging her courage. Kalen's eyes softened, and for the first time, Selara thought she saw a flicker of relief in them. "You passed the first test," Kalen said. "But this is only the beginning. My curse is not a simple shadow. It is a trial that touches every corner of my being. To face it is to face me, and the man I have been forced to become." Selara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his words. "Then I will face it," she said, "because I do not believe that a man, even cursed, is beyond redemption." Kalen's expression darkened, and he took a step closer. "Redemption is not given lightly. It must be earned through trials that test heart, mind, and soul, and sometimes it requires sacrifice." Over the next days, Selara found herself drawn deeper into Kalen's world. He guided her through the palace, showing her secret passages, hidden gardens, and rooms filled with ancient relics that whispered of old magic. Each place carried a sense of danger, yet also beauty, as if the shadows themselves had a soul. During one walk through the northern gardens, Kalen stopped at a fountain, its waters glowing faintly under the moonlight. "This was my mother's favorite," he said softly. "Before the curse, before the kingdom's darkness fell upon us." Selara looked at him, sensing the depth of his sorrow. "You carry more than power," she said. "You carry memories and grief." He nodded slowly, his gaze falling to the fountain. "The curse feeds on pain, anger, and fear. It has made me distant, feared, and ruthless. I have watched friends and allies fall to shadows because I could not trust them, could not trust myself." Selara reached out, her hand brushing his. "Then trust me," she whispered. I am not like the others. I will not fear you nor your shadows. Kaelin's eyes widened, and for a moment he seemed unsteady, as if her words had touched something buried deep within him. You are not afraid, he said, almost in disbelief. That is dangerous. Solara smiled faintly. Then I will be the danger that challenges your shadows. That night, Kaelin brought her to the palace library, a vast hall lined with towering shelves. Ancient tomes glimmered faintly with magical scripts. He handed her a book bound in black leather, its pages filled with cryptic symbols. This is the story of the curse, he said. It has followed my family for generations. To break it, or even to understand it, you must be willing to see what others cannot. Solara opened the book carefully, her fingers tracing the strange symbols. As she read, she realized the curse was more than just shadows. It was a living force, feeding on fear and doubt, and it had shaped Kaelin into the man the kingdom feared. Yet even through the darkness, she sensed glimpses of the man he could be, strong, just, and capable of love. Days became weeks, and with each passing moment, their bond grew. Kaelin tested her courage with trials, walking through shadowed halls, facing illusions that stirred memory and pain, and listening to whispers that sought to break her resolve. Each time, Solara met the challenge with calm and determination, refusing to falter. Kaelin watched her, fascinated. You do not break, he said one night, his voice almost a whisper. Even when the shadows try to bend your will, you do not break. I have learned from my own shadows, Solara replied. We all carry them. It is not the shadows that define us, but how we respond to them. For the first time in years, Kaelin felt a stirring of hope. He had ruled through fear and power, believing no one could see past the darkness he carried. Yet here was Solara, brave, kind, and unwavering, challenging him not with swords or words, but with her heart. But not all within the palace welcomed Solara. Whispers of rebellion grew louder. Some council members viewed her presence as a threat, questioning why a beggar widow had gained the Alpha King's attention. Rumors spread through the halls, and tension began to build. Then came the night that would test both Solara's courage and Kaelin's control. A masked figure slipped through the corridors, silent and deadly, with a plan that could end the fragile balance Solara had begun to establish. Solara was alone in the moonlit hall when she first sensed it. A shadow moving unnaturally, not like the curse she had grown to understand, but deliberate, human, and dangerous. She turned, heart pounding, and saw the glint of a dagger in the dark. Before she could react, a hand closed over her wrist, strong and warm. Kaelin had appeared as if from the shadows themselves, his silver eyes blazing with fury and something else, something primal. Stay behind me, he growled, his voice echoing against the walls. The shadow hesitated, recognizing the power in him. The cursed Alpha King, the man feared by the kingdom, was a force unlike any she had ever known. Solara watched, awestruck and terrified, as Kaelin moved with fluid precision, the shadows around him bending and twisting as if answering his command. The intruder was thrown back, disarmed, and vanished into the night, leaving only the echo of anger and warning in their wake. Solara's hands shook, and Kaelin's gaze softened when he looked at her. You are safe, he said, though the tension in his shoulders betrayed the danger that lingered even now. I was afraid, she admitted, voice trembling. Kaelin's expression softened further, almost tenderly. You are brave, he said, more than anyone I have ever known, and yet, you must understand, to be near me is to walk in shadows. There are dangers that even I cannot always prevent. Solara looked at him, her chest tightening with emotion. I would face the shadows if it meant staying near you, she whispered. For a moment, Kaelin was silent, as if weighing the gravity of her words. Then, slowly, he nodded. Then you are no ordinary woman, he said. And perhaps, neither am I. The storm outside had ended long ago, but the storm within the palace, and within their hearts, was far from over. Solara had faced the shadows and proved her courage, yet she did not know what new trials awaited her. Kaelin's curse was alive, relentless, and far more dangerous than anything she had yet encountered. The kingdom of Erendor had never felt so heavy. The morning sun struggled to pierce the gray clouds, casting a cold light over the blackened towers of the palace. Rumors of rebellion had spread like wildfire, and whispers of a rival claimant reached every corner of the court. Solara stood at her chamber window, watching the city below, her heart both anxious and resolute. She had walked through shadows, faced the curse, and survived tests that would have broken most. But now the greatest trial awaited, Not in the halls of the palace, but beyond its walls, in the lands where darkness gathered. Kalen approached silently, his silver eyes calm yet unreadable. The weight of the crown pressed down on him, but beneath it something new glimmered, a spark of hope, fragile yet undeniable. "The time has come," he said softly. "The kingdom is at the brink. The shadows of the past will rise, and I cannot face them alone." Solara turned to him, courage steadying her voice. "You will not face them alone. We have faced darkness together, haven't we? The shadows in the palace, the trials, your curse. I will stand with you." Kalen studied her, his gaze intense, and for a moment the cold armor of his kingly exterior melted, revealing a man who had carried too much alone for far too long. "You do not know what you are asking," he said. "There is danger that even I cannot command. Once we step beyond these walls, there may be no return." "I am not afraid of what awaits us," Solara said firmly. "I am afraid only of losing what we have built, the trust, the hope, the bond between us." Kalen nodded, a rare softness in his silver eyes. "Then let us go," he said. Together they rode through the city gates, the streets quiet in the early hours. Citizens peered from their windows, whispers trailing behind them like banners in the wind. Soldiers lined the roads, bowing to the Alpha King and his companion. Yet there was tension in the air, the sense that something dark awaited beyond the horizon. The journey led them into the shadowed forests of the north, a place where sunlight barely touched the ground and the wind carried secrets of long-forgotten magic. The air was thick, alive with the pulse of the curse that had haunted Kalen for decades. Trees twisted unnaturally, their roots like fingers gripping the earth, and distant howls echoed through the fog. "This is where the shadow begins," Kalen said quietly. "It will test us in ways that are more than physical. It will seek our doubts, our fears, the cracks in our hearts." Solara reached for his hand, finding strength in the warmth of his grip. "Then we face it together," she said. The shadows rose as if in response, coiling around them, whispering doubts and fears. Solara felt a chill in her bones as illusions of failure, despair, and loss pressed against her mind. Yet she did not waver. She remembered the hunger, the cold, and the loss she had survived. She remembered the kindness that had drawn Kalen to her in the first place, and she remembered the spark of humanity she had seen in him, buried beneath the curse. Kalen moved beside her, commanding the shadows with gestures that were both graceful and fierce. Each motion seemed to bend the darkness, forcing it back, yet the curse was relentless, feeding on his own fears. At one point, the shadows reached for him, attempting to pull him into the depths of despair. "Do not falter," Solara shouted, stepping forward. "You are stronger than they believe, Kalen. We are stronger together." Her voice rang out like a bell, and the shadows recoiled, momentarily retreating. Kalen's silver eyes met hers, filled with awe and gratitude. In that moment, he realized that Solara was more than a companion. She was the anchor he had needed, the light to guide him through the darkness he had carried for so long. They pressed on, reaching the heart of the shadowed forest, where a massive, twisting tree stood, a tree of blackened roots and silver leaves glowing faintly under the moonlight. At its base lay the source of the curse, a crystal pulsating with dark energy, feeding on Kalen's pain and memories. "To break it," Kalen said, voice low, "I must face everything I have become, the anger, the fear, the loss, and even then it may not be enough." Solara stepped beside him, placing her hand on his arm. "You are not alone," she whispered. "You do not have to face it alone. Let me help you." Kalen looked into her eyes, seeing the unwavering trust and courage that mirrored his own need for redemption. Slowly, he nodded. Together, they approached the crystal. Kalen closed his eyes, breathing deeply, summoning every ounce of strength. The shadows surged, wrapping around them both, testing their bond, their resolve, their hearts. He saw visions of the past, the loss of his family, the deaths of allies, the cold fear that had hardened him. The crystal pulsed, feeding on these memories, growing brighter and heavier. Solara pressed her hand against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "You are not your shadows," she said firmly. "You are more than this curse. You are the man I see, the man who can love, protect, and lead." Kalen opened his eyes, silver light blazing like twin moons. The curse roared, but together they faced it, not with fear, but with courage, trust, and hope. Slowly, the shadows began to dissipate, drawn into the crystal, which cracked and shattered under the force of their unity. Kalen fell to his knees, exhausted but free. The forest was quiet, the shadows gone, leaving only the soft glow of moonlight through the trees. Solara knelt beside him, helping him to his feet. You did it," she said softly, voice filled with wonder. "The curse is broken." Kalen looked at her, a mixture of disbelief and relief in his gaze. "No," he said, "we did it together." The journey back to the palace was quiet but filled with a new energy. The sun had begun to rise, painting the city in hues of gold and pink. Citizens emerged from their homes, watching as the Alpha King returned, but he seemed different now, lighter, freer, more alive. Beside him, Celera walked not as a beggar widow, but as a companion, a partner, and something more, an equal in courage and heart. In the days that followed, Kalen began to rebuild the kingdom with a new vision. The council, once cold and suspicious, saw the change in him and respected the woman who had stood by his side. Celera's presence reminded him that power was not only measured in strength or fear, but in kindness, trust, and the bonds forged through adversity. One evening, Kalen led Celera to the palace gardens, where the fountains reflected the twilight. "You have changed more than the palace," he said softly. "You have changed me and the kingdom along with it." Celera smiled, her hand finding his. "And you have shown me that even in darkness there can be light." Kalen pulled her close, his silver eyes softening as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I was lost in shadows for so long," he said. "But you reminded me of what it means to be human, to love, and to trust. I cannot imagine life without you." Celera's heart swelled with emotion. "I cannot imagine it either," she said. For a moment the world seemed to pause, the wind stilled, the fountains whispered softly, and the palace, once heavy with shadow and fear, felt alive with hope and warmth. The curse was gone, but the lessons remained. Courage, compassion, and the strength of a bond forged in fire and shadow could overcome even the darkest of fates. As they walked through the gardens, hand in hand, Kalen whispered, "This is not the end, Celera, but it is the beginning of something far greater than either of us could have imagined." Celera looked up at him, silver eyes meeting silver eyes, and for the first time in her life she felt fully safe, fully alive, and fully seen. Far beyond the horizon, the sun rose over the kingdom, illuminating the towers of Erendor in gold and silver light. And though the world held challenges yet unknown, one truth remained unshakable. Love, courage, and hope could break even the deepest shadows, and together they could face anything.